I originally involved myself in the Agent Orange issue in early 1985 upon receiving a communication from the New Jersey Agent Orange Commission about a deadline for filing under this new class action lawsuit called MDL 381 against the chemical companies. I received the communication and filled out the forms. However, in filling out the forms, I noted that in order to apply for the class action lawsuit, you had to be 100% disabled according to either Social Security standards or Veterans Administration standards. Since I was working, had a great job, I could not file under the class action lawsuit. Those veterans who did file under the class action lawsuit were totally disabled. However, that disability did not have to be caused by their exposure or illnesses from Agent Orange. You only had to be 100% disabled. So if you were 100% disabled from another issue and you served in Vietnam, you could collect under the class action lawsuit. However, even though I couldn't file under the class action lawsuit, it piqued my interest on Agent Orange exposure and illnesses, which got me thinking, going back many years, to issues that came up with me, my family, and including my children. Going back to the early days when I was in Vietnam, in fact, a little history with that is I was drafted out of the Bronx, New York, classified 1A in July of 1965, and in September of 1965, I received my draft notice. When I got to Vietnam in September of 1966 and was at the various places I was stationed, I witnessed and I saw certain individuals' backpacks spraying. They were spraying what was called some kind of defoliant, weed killer, leaf killer, the various rainbow herbicide colors, as you call it. Basically, they're called rainbow herbicides because there's Agent Orange, Agent Blue, Agent White, and those herbicides got those classifications because on the 55-gallon drums that they were stored in had the band around them in the color of the type of herbicide was in there. So Agent Orange naturally had an Agent Orange band. Agent White had a white band, etc., etc. So when this occurred, we saw this type of backpack spraying or spraying off of 2.5-ton trucks. We didn't really think anything about it. I didn't anyway. In fact, I didn't even really know, other than when you actually kill weeds at home, you would almost do the same thing. One of the reasons I kept my involvement in the Agent Orange issue is in the area of birth defects related to our exposure to herbicides. And when I say our exposure, I'm talking what's called male-mediated birth defects. Most of the time you think of birth defects as if the mother was exposed to something, but here we're talking something different. Here we're talking our exposure. And our exposure transferred to our children through process of our wives having, or significant others having children fathered by us. And we're the ones who were exposed, not the mother. What got me involved later on, even way before my 1985 involvement with the New Jersey Agent Orange Commission and the class action lawsuit, was getting sick and my children having certain issues and also miscarriages. My wife and I suffered through 3 miscarriages, My first son was born, thankfully healthy, but he had certain issues. When we then had 2 miscarriages and my second child was born, there was an issue, physical issue, a certain defect issue that had to be corrected by surgery 4.5 years later. Then another miscarriage, and then my daughter was born, and she also had some issues, certain learning disability and certain physical defect issues, which were also corrected by surgery when she was 16 years old. All of these I started putting together and saying, wait, where is this coming from? And then also a short period after I got back from Vietnam, I started experiencing some nerve conditions. And these nerve conditions gradually got worse. At first I thought it was something, they called it was a type of peripheral nerve disorder or peripheral neuropathy. I've subsequently learned that it's really called a movement disorder. And what it does, it causes uncontrolled movements in my legs and my arms, my upper body and my legs. It gradually gets worse each year. And thankfully, it is not life-threatening, but it's a definite nerve condition that almost is debilitating because you cannot control the movements of your arms or legs at times. The VA has denied that claim for service connection based upon what was called peripheral neuropathy, and subsequently also called restless leg syndrome and periodic limb movement disorder. The Department of Veterans Affairs is not just a self-regulating organization, it's a dictatorship that does what it wants. There could be rules put down, maybe by Congress, and the VA might ignore them. Example, in terms of spina bifida, when spina bifida was service-connected, in fact, it was the only item ever service-connected to the child of a veteran, the first one, they still did, and they were supposed to, a child with spina bifida, it's a horrendous birth defect, and were supposed to give out at the highest rating. They hardly ever did. It had to be fought by the families back and forth. The funds for veterans and should be there. They should be covered. And especially, new veterans, new people, servicemen and women, have to know that they're going to be treated with respect and honor to be covered if they become sick. You talk Vietnam veterans, Gulf War veterans, Gulf War I veterans were exposed to contaminants and wherever they got them from. I don't know all of the stories, but Gulf War illness has been almost decried by the VA. It's in their mind. Adding to the discussion on illnesses incurred by Vietnam veterans, and Vietnam veterans, basically, if you had the Vietnam Service Medal, or as the term they called boots on the ground in Vietnam, you were considered presumed to be exposed. So that was the parameter of discussing, or actually your illnesses, whether it could be service-connected or not. So if you had boots on the ground, you were considered presumed to be exposed. The presumption is there, whether you were in Vietnam, in the northern section of South Vietnam, the southern section, you were in Saigon, you were in small outlets, you spent your time in a base camp, you were presumed to be exposed. So now when Vietnam veterans were contracting these illnesses at a much younger age than the rest of the population in this country, that presumption is that you were exposed to herbicides and you should be service-connected for these illnesses. right now, those illnesses are almost few and far between. There are cancers that Vietnam veterans are developing, mainly soft tissue cancers, I think multiple myeloma. They say there are like 41 types of cancer, but basically in those 41 or so types of cancer, they're in a small group of cancers, such as soft tissue cancers, and where that's kind of dioxin builds up in your fatty tissue. So that's why those are the key items that the VA has service connected. We've gone through years and years of lies, cover-ups, and deceit by the Department of Veterans Affairs in service-connecting illnesses. The original ranch hand study was shown to be flawed. Not just flawed, cover-ups. Back in the 1980s, there was a CDC study that was flawed. It seems that every time studies are done, they're flawed against the veteran. And you can look these studies up. Even there have been lies in civilian studies. There was a study in 1990 with one of the chemical companies was known to have lied and covered up the results of their studies. So you see why someone like me and other veterans who are involved in this Agent Orange dioxin herbicide issue stay involved. It's an area where you gain a measure of, I won't use the term happiness, but of accomplishment when another illness is service-connected. Because this committee, this commission, whatever you're a committee member, you're an Agent Orange researcher, you're just an advocate, you feel good when you find out something else was service-connected. But the end result is, on this issue, is you're going to be sick or you're going to die. And to feel elated that another illness, such as ALS, is service-connected, goes with the sadness is that that veteran's going to die. And everything that occurs in this issue results in sickness or death. And it's known, from what I know, just backtracking about herbicides and how the herbicides work on the plants, or the Agent Orange specifically was for broadleaf plants. And it acts as a hormone. And the reason it worked so fast, it aged the plants like virtually overnight. In a few days, I were defoliated. How did they get defoliated so fast? Basically, they aged. And when you correlate that to the illnesses that Vietnam vets are coming up with, many of the illnesses hitting Vietnam vets in their 40s at the time, a few decades ago, 50s, 60s now, should happen to people in their 80s. So it's not to say that you would not get prostate cancer when you're 85 years old, but why are you getting it when you're 55 or 60 on a mass basis? Why are veterans who never smoked getting lung cancer, exposed veterans? So if what it did to the plants is act as that hormone, what is it doing to our bodies? It's aging us.